Podcasters Roundtable, round 48. Welcome back. Podcast crossover. All right. I think I always find myself saying, what does that even mean? So today I'm actually going to read the description that I took a little time to write to try to explain it, because this one comes out of, again, it comes off the list of people who sign up to be on the roundtable, meaning you just join the email list, you got put into a little Google form, and it says, what would you like to talk about? So go to podcastersroundtable.com, sign up for that, let us know so I know you're out there, we'll bring you on. So Wayne did that, so you'll meet Wayne, and I kind of ran with it because then Corey, who's also been on the roundtable, had a recent experience about not necessarily doing something outside the studio with his podcast. It wasn't his podcast, but it was related to it. We'll find out more about that. But here's what I wrote. It says, when you start a podcast, you become much more than a podcaster, especially these days, right? It used to be, I didn't write this part, used to be you start a podcast, you kind of did that, and that was your thing. Maybe some people took it past that, but I mean, that takes so much time, right? So anyways, you've crossed the line from media consumer to media producer. So have you taken your new talents outside the studio? Perhaps you've been on TV, you've written an article for a newspaper or a magazine, or you've given presentations at conferences, all as a result of having a podcast. So I wanted to discuss what other kinds of content your podcast can lead to. So that's our jumping off point. That's where we're going to go. Again, the Roundtable would take it anywhere. The Roundtable is expected to take it hopefully somewhere I didn't even think of. So we will jump off the podcast conversion sort of cliff and see what happens. And but let's meet the Roundtable without hesitation. On the end, returning Roundtabler, Corey, welcome back, buddy.
Hey, Ray, thanks for having me back on. I am Corey Fineran, and with the IVNB podcast, we cover the Chicago Cubs.
Hey, your mic sounds a little less muddy today.
This great audio engineer helped me kind of hone in on it, and yeah.
Good thing you have friends like that, Corey.
I know, yeah.
Wink. That's what happens when you get on a Skype call with Ray to plan something else completely different. He's like, how about you take the low end and tweak it a little bit on your... Anyways, all right. Welcome back, Corey. All right, next to him, co-hosting duties falls to Mr. Daniel J. Lewis. Welcome back.
Thank you very much. I'm excited to talk about crossing over. Have you crossed over yet?
Maybe we all have.
Ball.
Yeah, this might not even be real. We live in a box. Yeah, you'll get a chance to meet us. So in your reality, if you're going to NMX, you can poke me in the shoulder and be like, oh, Ray's real, Dave's real, Daniel, not so sure. We learned in the previous round that Daniel was actually a vampire. Or no, like some type of goblin. I don't know what that was. But anyways, funny stuff. You got to go back and check out what that was about. He was on a TV show. It's amazing. Oh, we can talk about that. Nah, it wasn't really Daniel. David Jackson, Mr. Co-host, welcome back, buddy.
Nice to be back. Dave Jackson from the schoolofpodcasting.com.
And director of podcast whatever at New Media Expo.
Yeah, that would be my crossover. Director of podcasting at the New Media Expo.
There you go. Well, thank you, Dave, for joining us, and we will see you on the next round. So, Dave shared all his experience. No way. Dave's been podcasting back in the day, so we know he's got more experience. Yeah. All right, new roundtabler, because we always have one. Always, in quotes. Always have one. Mr. Wayne, welcome to the roundtable.
Hey, thanks for having me, guys. Wayne Brekke. I host Worlds of Wayne. I actually have five shows. So I host also the Necronomicast, a horror-based podcast, D&D 5e, a Dungeons & Dragons podcast, 5 O'Clock Lifestyle, a cocktail podcast, and then, last but not least, Strong Words, which is a more of a copywriting podcast. So, yeah, kind of keeps me busy.
Yeah, that's quite a span. And, I mean, is this your job? Because that's a lot of stuff.
I'm trying to make it that, yes. And that's the reason for starting some of the other podcasts. The thing I've been doing Worlds of Wayne for 9+ years, and I started out just doing interviews. I was writing for a local entertainment magazine and recording all the interviews with the rock stars and celebrities and whatnot. And I thought, wow, this would be great podcast material. So I started an entertainment one just to try it out about 9 years ago.
So you actually still do have to go to a day job, is what you're saying?
Yeah. Well, I own my own company. I own a writing service, so I get to have that kind of freedom where I can do it, and I have to really schedule everything because it's a lot of work.
One podcast is like a whole full-time job, in my opinion. So I don't know how you done it.
You're right, definitely.
everyone on this panel probably has more than one show. So that's what happens, right, guys? Start one, then you start another. We did a round where it says, like, when do you know when to start that second podcast? So check out that round. I'm not sure if we came to any solid conclusions, but maybe you'll get some good advice in there. All right. Well, Wayne, since you are so here's how it goes. When you sign up to the Roundtable, it says, what do you want to talk about? Something like that. It's worded a little bit better than that. And it just lets you list things. And I kind of explain that, hey, this isn't a how-to show. This is literally just a discussion about issues that podcasters face, right? So try to make it something we can kind of dig into and not necessarily teach people. We, four of us now have podcasts about podcasting. Corey is now in that niche. And we don't need that. Hopefully people will learn just from us having a conversation about the issues that we face as producers. Everyone here watching, most everyone is a producer of a podcast. So we get to share great experiences with new people each time. So Wayne, in your lineup, and I didn't dig any further than just saying the one sentence, it said sort of dealing with, I think you said dealing with the media, something like that, right? And so what were you referring to? Oh, you know what? First, can you give us the treat? You treated us in the pre-show to a world of ATRs. You got to give us a little.
Oh, really? Oh, yeah, I can do that. In a world where one roundtable and 4 podcast producers try and figure out a topic, leaving listeners dumbfounded.
So awesome. You know how many jobs you're going to get from the chat room. How do you not want that on your podcast? That's amazing.
Don LaFontaine was my idol when I was younger, and I've always loved that and always wanted to do voiceover, which is one of the reasons I got into podcasting, so I could do it whenever I wanted.
You should be making money with that thing. That's amazing.
Yeah, would you say that again, please, a little louder?
Well,
tell
hey,
us your website again, a little bit louder.
Yeah, louder. Yeah. I think when I gave you that idea, what I was thinking was that there's a lot of things that a podcast producer does. Once you start a show, and no matter what level of success, what my goal was, I was already an artist and a musician. I've been doing a lot of things for years like that, but it's kind of creating yourself as a personality, not only for the listeners, but locally too, because you can get a lot of local support for your show, for what you do. And I wanted to find out about what other people do. Now, a lot of you guys get to go to conferences and you give presentations about podcasting or your show. With my shows, what I've done, because I host a lot of bands, musicians that come in through town and they come on the show. And so as a result of that, I've been doing things like gotten asked to present at Omaha Entertainment and Arts Awards. So that for 4 years, been able to do that. Getting interviews in local media, in the newspaper, on people's blogs. I just had an interview today with a guy who writes a blog and wanted to talk about podcasting in the shows. That kind of thing, to be able to expose yourself even locally as that. It's kind of, to me, podcasting is parallel to being in a band. You do the same exact thing pretty much as far as promoting yourself and become, making yourself a personality, making your show a personality. And that kind of thing can be difficult for some people if they're not used to being, having FaceTime with the public. So that's kind of where I was going with that. It's being able to get out there and say, hey, you should interview me because I have this podcast. And now that podcasting to me is getting more exposure, more people are very receptive to learning more about it, and that even extends into helping others create shows. So I'm not as expert as you guys are as far as having a podcast about podcasting, but I've helped several people start shows, and I think that's also important. And so it's being able to use your show and your talents off the mic and in a different arena. Like I MC and do music for our Omaha Roller Girls, based off of the fact that I do this a lot. I've been in front of a mic, in front of a crowd, not afraid to do that, and being entertaining to people. So that's kind of where I was going with that.
Dave, you actually, as I'm about to ask you, it pops up in the chat room. It says podcasting is like being a musician without drunk people spilling beer on you. So, yeah, well, it depends on your co-host.
Yeah.
Well, and there's no lugging gear around, and people coming out going, "You play Mustang Sally?"
Yeah.
So,
free bird, come on. Dave, you were shaking your head. So, I mean, you're a musician as well, so you'd relate to that statement then.
Oh, yeah. it drives my wife nuts. She wants me to get back in a band, and I'm like, kind of the connection I get with my audience is a lot like that connection I had playing music. It's not quite the same, but enough to where I go, let's see, I don't have to lug my gear around. I'm making $50 a night for about 7 hours worth of work.
I was gonna say which pays better.
Yeah, getting home smelling like God knows what. It's not a fun time, and it's when I had the passion for music, I did it, and this has kind of replaced it.
So Wayne, you were talking about like sort of getting out there and making yourself available, but to something that's not like another podcast, maybe the newspaper or whatever other connections you've had in the community, especially back when you were doing it a long time ago, as opposed to right now. It's like you said, it's a little easier, it's more exposure. But what's that first step you can take to letting people know you're out there, and then obviously having that be enough credibility to be like, oh yeah, we actually do want to talk to you, right? Because you're like, I got a podcast,
right? And that's just it's all in the, to me, marketing and promotion arena for the most part. I think it's one of those things that I always kind of, no matter what I'm doing as far as promotion and any other avenue, always try and work in that, hey, I do a show. I have a lot of local bands, a lot of local just interesting people, a lot of touring acts that come through. You talked about a band that, at least you don't get the beer spilled everywhere. Yeah, I had my podcast studio set up at my home bar, and then also I've had plenty of drunk musicians on here that have actually spilled beer all over my stuff. So, but yeah, it's really just about being able to market yourself as a podcaster and showing people that that may not know about podcasting. And once they find out that you host your own show, that you've created this, because creating a podcast is a sole endeavor for the most part when you start out. And once they realize that you've done that, it's kind of the same thing as promoting your band. Yeah, I'm a band. We just started out, and people want to do write-ups on you and find out what kind of music you play, so they're always interested. And so I look to local media to help me just get some credibility as far as being, if you want to get interviews and things like that, it's just reaching out. And it's been amazing being able to just reach out, and they're receptive to it.
Who you reach out to, though? I mean, you know what I'm saying?
I would basically reaching out to starting out local media. So most towns have a entertainment magazine. Now that's a great place to start. You can start by you can take out an ad in a local magazine. You could do trade-offs. You could say, hey, I would like to do an interview with this person and write about it to put in your magazine, and put a link in there to the show. And they can either read the article, and that's how I started. They would read the article, 500 words is all I get, but then they can go to the link, they can go to the show page and hear the entire interview. So reaching out to local magazines, I think, is a good start if you want to get the attention of, and maybe get a much bigger following as far as, just people that are interested in what you have to offer. And then once that kind of starts and people start to see your show, because what I've noticed is that there's not a lot of, I don't see any other Omaha podcasts with an ad in a local magazine or hosting an event or anything else like that. And it's all solely based not on my business that I own, but on the show.
All right, jump in here, Roundtable. What are we thinking?
I have something to add to that. I mean, I think that sometimes we feel like traditional media is kind of up on this mighty throne, like they're untouchable kind of or something. But really, like podcasters, I think traditional media folks are trying to fill their need for content too. And so I think it's actually, kind of like Wayne's saying, it's easier than it seems. I've been able to, our podcast has been in different newspapers and on TV and radio and stuff like that. And, I would say that at first my inclination, I guess, was to do a press release and things like that. And I had no luck with that type of stuff. I had a lot more luck with just direct contact with the person that I wanted, and just tell them, this is why I think you should have me on, or I think you should run a story on us for this reason. And I found that works a lot better than trying to blanket an area with press releases or something like that.
Yeah, and then Fred in the chat, he asked if I was going to talk about screencasting. But no, something a little different. I mean, sure, screencast is a different type. It's not a podcast. It can be a podcast, so you can deliver it as a video podcast. But I'm talking less about the medium, especially not necessarily podcast, but things outside of your podcast that are related, right? So we talked about local media, right? Being, putting an ad in a magazine or even having an article in a newspaper or something. But Corey, now you hinted at it, but recently you were on like your local news. Like you embedded the videos, really cool. People should check it out. And you were on the sports segment of your local news, right?
Yeah, they have me on at least once a year. This time it was just last week, about a week ago that I did it, or 4 or 5 days ago. And he said that he'd like to have me on more often this baseball season, maybe every month or so. And that's what it was. I've been doing it for 4 years, and I just kind of made contact with them, and they need stories, they need content, and so I think it does a few things. I mean, it is exposure for your podcast. At the same time, like, forget about what your topic is. I think you're kind of being an evangelist for podcasting as a medium. It's getting people more familiar with the term and stuff like that. But then also, it's practice and experience. And I think that it gives podcasting some credibility when, quote unquote, real media people see you hold your own and share and present information well.
The point on practice and credibility is something that I can relate to. I have been on HBO before, and I thought it was just a joke that someone said, "Hey, I saw you on HBO," and I thought, yeah, another Daniel Day-Lewis joke. And no, it wasn't the vampire thing from last episode, but it was actually an interview that I was in, a documentary, not even a podcast documentary, but it had absolutely nothing to do with podcasting. But it was the practice in being interviewed and communicating to an audience that podcasting provides enabled me to have this opportunity to be interviewed for a documentary that aired on HBO then. And they said after the interview something like, "Oh, this went really smoothly. We don't need to do a lot of editing with this or cleanup." And they made it even last longer because they said, "This is such a great conversation." And it's not to say I'm that special, but it's the practice we get in podcasting, making conversations or presentations episode after episode.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, like my first semester of college, you had to at some point take speech class. And I was like, I am taking that right now. I'm getting over with, because no one likes to speak in public. Most people. I mean, saying nobody it's not even a stretch. Like, that makes most everybody nervous. And a lot of people makes them practically pass out and puke on themselves. I don't know which one happens first, but I've seen it. It's terrible. Like, it is harder to watch someone else who's nervous speak in public than to actually speak in public for me. But a lot of my friends said I'm putting that off to the end. I took it right away, right up front. And it changed. It might have been like the most important class I took, because suddenly I could talk to people. In high school, I was pretty shy. After that, it was like, who wants to talk? Let's go out and meet people. It just really, and I think it helps to see that everyone is kind of that same way. So a lot of podcasters are nervous in the beginning. They're trying to get it perfect, and they're worried that they don't sound great or whatever. But you have to get those first ones under your belt, right? You have to press record, and it has to matter. Like, I think you have to publish it. So, I think it does do a lot of good for, call it media training, whatever. But yeah, it's pretty cool. And you can be more, you have more of a personality instead of being really stiff and nervous when you get an opportunity to be like outside of your podcast.
That's also kind of why I prefer radio and TV over newspapers. Because when you are on the radio or TV, listeners and viewers of that program, they're getting a direct connection with you. And I found that when a newspaper does like a feature story, they frequently mess things up. They word things in ways that you didn't word it, and they explain your podcast or podcasting in terms that aren't ideal. So I'm not saying you should write off the written press, but I do think that radio and TV are better suited for us as podcasters.
I was going to mention too that there's a couple of extra things that I thought about as far as getting outside of your show, and one was something that I did a while back, which was start a local podcasters group. I wanted to find out. I felt like I was one of the only podcasters in Omaha, and now after 9 years, there's a bunch of them, and so what I wanted to do, everybody needs help, and so I just got a local group together called Podheads United, and I started a Facebook group, and then we post tips and things like this and everything else, and we get together. We have get-togethers. We'll go to a local pub and we'll talk about podcasting and how to do it. And people would come that are interested in doing a show of their own, but there's unless you actually go out and find how to do it, it's a little intimidating. to do. Of course, everybody that's familiar with your shows realizes that. So it's locally too. You can do that. And my other point was that radio DJs, local radio DJs, you always see them hosting stuff, or they're a presenter. They become local celebrities because they're on the radio. And the thing is, before, a few years back, it was only local for the most part. For that, wherever that station was, unless they were syndicated, that's all that heard it. You can get on with the cheapest stuff to start a podcast, and you've got already an international availability. So I think part of that was my thought was, hey, well, if these radio DJs can be out in the spotlight in the public and do things like host award shows, or just do remote things and do produce their own events, well, why can't I, as a podcaster? I have a wider reach than those guys do. So that was one of my main things. I didn't want it to be where being a podcast host was just some guy in his basement. Actually, that's really all I am. That's what I do.
Two guys in a basement.
Talking about oh, wait a minute. I do that too.
Hey, Corey. Oh, go ahead, Wayne.
No, I said that's just another way to be able to put yourself in a place that will give you that kind of exposure and kind of make. It's kind of arrogant to say, I say, ego. I don't know. Like, you want the spotlight. All of us kind of do, but it's a way to really make a name for yourself and your show.
Yeah, no, I don't think it's ego. I mean, I think anyone who gets into a podcast, I mean, we don't mind the exposure, right? We get in there and we hope people listen. So, yeah, it's not bad to want more exposure, more listeners, just put a face to whatever it is you're doing. Corey, walk us a little bit more through, like, actually tell us about that first contact. Like, how does that even happen, right?
I knew what show I wanted to go on. I know who I.
You said show, but you were on like the news, so you mean?
Well, it's a local sports show that's on right after the news. So yeah, gotcha. I mean, it's part of the broadcast, I guess. But so I just knew who I wanted to go to, and same thing with the different newspapers and things we've done, and the radio station that we work with most closely. I just knew the person that I wanted to get in contact with, and I emailed them directly, and basically said, this is what, and of course you have to kind of talk about whatever you've accomplished with your podcast or whatever, but just to kind of give yourself a little credibility if they're not familiar with you. But like I said, I mean, they're looking for stuff to fill their slots. So I mean, it's really kind of easy.
Yeah,
at least it has been in my experience.
And you said one of the keys was like just getting that first invite, right? Now right. They have you back, right? I mean, once you've cracked that door and gotten through.
Right. And that's another reason I kind of prefer radio and TV over newspapers, is because once a newspaper's run a feature on you, a feature article or whatever, well, you're basically cashed out there, unless they do some sort of like regular column or something like that, which then means more work for you. So that's kind of why I prefer the TV and radio, because that's something where they'll get in, maybe after a couple months, if we have something big coming up or there's something going on with the Cubs, I'll send them an email, hey, we've got this to talk about, do you have any time to fit us in? Or they'll contact us if they need to fill a slot.
So what's it like to be, you didn't puke before you went on? You didn't puke and pass out? And you're sitting there, big cameras, big lights?
No, there's only like 2 people in the studio other than the host, and it's pretty laid back. I'm always kind of freaked out because you just never know what they're going to ask you, and there's no editing.
I was nervous. I was nervous for you because here's the thing, like, the people watching this are crazy Cub fans. And when I say crazy Cub fans, that applies to any team, right? Sports fans, anyone who is like really into their topic. It doesn't matter. It could be a podcast show like this one. But you're going to be so criticized. Can you just hear? I could hear people like yelling at the TV like, no, we don't want him coming up from the minors yet. And it's like, I don't want to say the wrong thing because I don't want to hurt my podcast at the same time. Right? Do you have any thoughts like that?
No, not really.
You're just a tough guy.
Right. No, I'm always worried that, like, there's so many, especially they bring me on at the beginning of the year, there's so many new players and everything, and I just know, like, somebody's name is going to, like, escape my mind, and then I'll just, like, freeze on camera, but it hasn't happened yet, so I'm sure it will at some point.
Yeah, you got to be a politician and learn how to, like, not answer the question. You just, talk about what you want to talk about. So Amanda in the chat, she says, I am so trying to do this 2 here in Maine. And then she says, it's not going so well, sad face. And I think maybe she's referring to starting a meetup group, maybe. I don't know. Maine's a pretty small place, but go ahead, Dave.
Well, just do it. I started off with, I think, 4, maybe 5. And I think I'm up to 8. I think the one week we had 10. But it's really cool because you then really get to know those people. And so, we email all the time. We didn't have a meeting this month because of New Media Expo, and everybody was like, oh, I can't wait till, you come back and it's going to be great. And I'm sure, in a year from now we'll be up to, and I almost kind of don't want it to be 50 people. I don't know. It's kind of cool having just a small little group, and give it a shot. If it's only 2 people, well, you've got a new bestest buddy. So definitely give it a shot.
Definitely. Check out meetup.com. I mean, for me, it really launched a whole career. It turned out there was a whole bunch of people way back in 2005, 2006 who were meeting, in small town Virginia. And there was like 30 to 50. It grew to where we had 70 people or something in this small studio. And it was amazing. You think, oh, well, I could spend my time on a podcast where I'm broadcasting to limitless numbers of potential people, right? As opposed to going, like you said, it's 10 people. So is it hard to say, this is clearly not for sort of growing my show to any huge level, right? So, I mean, what do you get you get friends from it. That's cool. I mean, I will say that you never know who's there, and just, I don't know, there just seems to be something about meeting people in person. For me, it was great. I think I agree with the same thing.
I think it's a support thing, because I think if you want to do a podcast, it's intimidating. If you've never done it, don't know anybody that has done it, you have to learn yourself. But it's a nice support. It's just nice support knowing it, because it's kind of a solitary endeavor. Like I said, you're down there doing your own content, hoping people like it, and having somebody else to talk to about it. Or, and like I said, also there's people that want to do shows, want to start a podcast, but don't know how. In fact, we had a meeting, and Ray, you Skyped in and talked to a bunch of people with us once.
Oh, yeah, that was good times.
That was a couple years ago, in fact, I think. And so that's something else that we did. It was like, hey, let's get together and let's talk to somebody that's an expert in the field. You can feel free to ask any questions you want, and then we can talk about it afterwards. And it really kind of brought a cool – and since then, I think probably about 4 or 5 people have started their own shows from that. And you feel more confident, I think.
So in the chat room, friend of the show, Jim was on a recent. Jim Cullison is in your group. He's in the chat.
Oh, really?
You know Jim?
Jim, how's it going? I believe so. I can't see any of the chat or anything. So
yeah, it's on the event page below.
Yeah. So Podheads United, woo, Omaha.
The Omaha, yeah, when he heard Omaha, he was all stoked in the chat room. That's awesome. There you go, right? So connecting offline and on. But, where else? I mean, for me personally, you guys, I'm curious, Dave and Daniel, like sort of your podcast crossover, besides HBO, because that's awesome. For me personally, go ahead.
Well, I'm waiting for right now. I've been interviewed. There's a local business magazine in Cleveland that has a little bit of clout called Crane's Cleveland Business. And the guy called me looking for Cleveland, of course, entrepreneurs who are doing podcasts. And I said, I know a lot of entrepreneur podcasts. I don't know that many in Cleveland. And he said, well, what do you do? And I said, well, let me tell you. And then he said, well, we're just going to make the story about you. And I'm like, darn. So I'm looking forward to that coming out, because like Corey was saying, as soon as that comes out, I'm then going to use that to contact other local people and say, hey, I was recently featured here. Here's why I think you should feature me in your media outlet. Yeah,
I mean, it is sort of one of those things, if you're an actor, get yourself into a movie, and then, suddenly maybe you can at least say I was in this one thing and go look at it over here and maybe pick up more roles. I mean, it's so funny because you'll see TV shows like, what was the one with the group of, about the high school kids, and now they're on like everything.
Saved by the Bell?
No, they kind of went away after Saved by the Bell. Freaks and Geeks. Like, all those people are like on something else. They all just spread out through the industry. Anyways, like, get your foot in, and the next thing you know, you go back years later and you're like, oh, I remember seeing them on that thing. And maybe, like, oh, I remember Ray and his podcast, and now he's doing all this other stuff, right? Dave's directing at NMX and all that good stuff. I mean, for me personally, the opportunity came up. Emeril Lagasse, who the famous cook, has many shows on Food Network and stuff, and he he was doing a like an open casting call in Virginia when I lived out there, and I said, well, I'll go to that. And my purpose was to just see how the big boys handle it, right? And how the big boys and girls do like interviews and casting calls, and I want to see their cameras and stuff. And they ended up picking me for the show. So I'm a whole half hour on this show. I'm in reruns on Planet Green. Not everyone has that channel, but on the Emerald Show. And I was hoping, hey, maybe they'll mention my podcast. They didn't. Back in the day, they were actually afraid to mention my show, which I was ridiculous because I'm me and he's Emerald. I'm pretty sure I was not taking over his media empire anytime soon. But they did refer to the fact that I did online, what'd they say? Like, they're just like online videos or something funny. And, but you can bet, as soon as I got back and that thing had aired, I went back to my website. And if you still go there today at prospeaker.com, it says, as seen on Emerald. Like I said, I'm using this to my advantage, right? So, do you guys take any of that sort? And that sort of says, like, there is still cred. There's plenty of cred. There's still all the money. Most of the money is still on traditional media, despite the fact that it is coming to digital. But there's plenty of cred, maybe because it's a high threshold to get into something that's traditional media, right? A lot of filters you got to get through, as opposed to podcasting. Anyone can start one. Technically, doesn't mean it'll be good. So, has any of you appeared on something and then taken that back and used it to boost your own credibility? Besides your award, Daniel, don't find it.
I wanted to wave it again.
I know. That was your chance.
Well, there's something recently happened for me, and I haven't. Maybe you guys will have an idea. I haven't figured out exactly how to market it yet, but we went to spring training to cover the Cubs a couple weeks ago, and while we were there, the Cubs asked me and my co-host to be the audio engineers for the Cubs radio broadcast one day, and so. I guess that's a crossover from podcasting to radio, and it's one of those things that, I got to figure out how to, I don't know if I can do the as appeared on Cubs radio broadcast, but I got to figure out some way to
cash in. You want to cash in. You want to get as much mileage out of it as you can, even though that was super cool. I don't know, posting a picture.
I was going to say, can you take a picture of here's me in the booth?
Oh, yeah, we took plenty of pictures.
Yeah, there you go.
Well, you now have a show about podcasting, so you can say you've engineered for professional broadcast.
I was going to say too, one thing that when you were mentioning getting asked to do things, as far as outside. So for my Necronomcast show, it's a horror-based podcast. One of the things that I did was to rent a table at a convention, like local convention here in Kansas City, as well as one in Omaha. So we would we'd just get a booth, a table, be able to set up our merchandise, have our mics up there, podcast live from the floor. Sometimes you can get some of the guests to come on the show. You can interview people that are at the convention, but it's have a big banner, and that's just another way to have a presence while you're doing your show, but outside of your studio. And so you can really, for us as a horror show, our audience is all there. It's a captive audience all in this convention center. So we need to be there, and that can put a face to the voice, which I think is maybe one of my main points. I think what really captures people is to put a face to the voice. They hear your voice. They want to see what you look like. Daniel, I had a totally different picture in my head of what he looked like.
Which is funny because it's like you're out there plenty, right? But sometimes this may be still the first time you see somebody. That's why I enjoy the Roundtable, because it is face to face.
Yeah, it's great. But that's another thing, and so doing things like putting yourself out there at a convention, putting money into it. It costs money to rent a table there, but it also is a great way not only for marketing promotion, but to connect with your audience. And that's the other really important thing, I think, is to connect with an audience. Now, if you can only connect with your audience locally, do it. Be out there. Make T-shirts with your podcast name on it, and be out there and connect with those people. Talk to them, because they're going to, just like you guys always talk about, engagement being, touching base with them when they see you and meet you. As an artist, too, I do paintings, and I've had more success meeting the individual that's buying a painting because I'm able to put it in their hands, talk to them about it. They get to meet the artist. So when they go and put it on their wall, they have a story to tell. Yeah. When he comes over and says that, and I think it's the same way with podcasting, is that, wow, they have a story to tell. And people are always interested, like, oh, a podcast, what does that mean? When you say, yeah, I got my own show. wow, and immediately lets you engage them in a different level, I think.
A podcast, what does that mean? We're still working on that one.
That's
so
getting less and less, though. I
know.
Today, people are really starting it.
You know, Steve in the Steve Lee in the chat, he put Addy, who I believe he's referring to Addy, who's also in the chat, launched a new site today which tracks podcasting event schedules. So it's Podcasters Unite .directory.
Yep, it's a cool site.
So check the show notes for that one, but that's cool. I'll have to check that out. And there's, a way to. Here's the thing: is about the meetup groups. Like I started one locally too, and there was like literally just a few people. But it would be cool to have more podcasters in more cities started up because more people will go and seek these things out. But more importantly, it would be cool to see like the pod camps reborn. Right? They were there and sort of dwindled away.
Remember Podcast Pickle?
Yeah.
Isn't that kind of what Jared is doing now with the Florida Fest or whatever it is, and then there's the Chicago, what you would call it, thingamabob?
Right.
Yeah, what Jared and Dan are doing, I think is really pretty genius when you look at the big picture. I think I figured out what they're doing. They're hosting these local one-day podcasting events, like Podcast San Diego was last Saturday, and I got to attend that while I was out there. And they're having Podcast Midwest in Chicago. They've had Podcast Florida. They're having Podcast New England in Boston, I think, later this year as well. So all of these regional conferences, and yeah, they're somewhat PodCamp inspired. Well, actually, no. I take that back. They're not PodCamp inspired. They're a single track, all podcasting focused, and the speakers, although you can submit a session, the speakers are vetted a little bit more, so you get higher quality content there. And at each of these events, then they're promoting podcast movement. So it's a great way, I think, to build enthusiasm for, okay, you liked this event that was 1 day, 1 track. Imagine a 2-day event with 6 tracks going on and hundreds of more podcasters than this.
Wow.
Yeah, it's they're being door-to-door salesmen for podcast movement, which is awesome. They're getting people. That is cool, and that's a good idea. If they have the ability to do that, they're going to rally, and they're going to create all these great things in the cities across the U.S. and maybe they'll extend it, and then they'll say, hey, come to our other one, because that was awesome. Yeah, that's a great theory, and I'm sure it's not even a theory. It sounds exactly right. So, but look for that. So you can look for those type of things, coming to you, and you might be able to speak as well. PodCamp was cool because it was a great way to get your feet wet in speaking, because you could just submit, and I think pretty much anyone got accepted.
Yeah.
So I started speaking at PodCamp. So it's really cool. In fact, and another PodCamp launched my career because of people I was talking to, hanging out with afterwards. So start something in your local area for sure, and get people in touch in person, and things happen, and then maybe we can have more of these sort of grassroots, which I think is what people enjoy. Podcast movement tried to sort of rekindle what they used to do in Orange in California, and the original like New Media Expo, or the name has changed so many times, right? Dave, what was the first one? Did you ever go to that one?
The very first one, yeah.
Yeah. See, Dave was at all the very first
Fred
stuff.
will know. Fred knows these. Castaneda knows all these. He's got the whole history when it changed, so I'm sure Fred can. It was something like the portable media.
Yeah, but you were there.
I was there, yeah.
And everyone talks about that one because there was because this thing was so new, yet a lot of big people. So it was kind of like the Freaks and Geeks, right? It was kind of like all the people that were at that event. Now you can find them, in the biggest, like Libsyn, was there. Rob and Todd from Blueberry. All those guys were there. All the big podcasters who now have been really successful. You're like, oh, I remember you were there.
Well, Keith and the girl were there. Emily Morse, who's now hosting the Podcast Awards, who's had her own show on FM. She was on the same station that Adam Carolla. She had a show on Bravo. She's branched out all over the place. So, yeah, a lot of people were at that. That was a lot of fun. CC Chapman now makes gazillions of dollars speaking everywhere.
So, Mike, Wayne, Mike, is it Uyghur? He's in the chat room. He says he's part of the Omaha group.
Yep. It's grown, and that's what there's a meeting, actually, a meetup coming up. That another person that actually it's Jim scheduled it, and it's again, it's a great way to just kind of communicate with other podcasters here locally. It's fun.
Yeah, Nick has a great question. Nick Suberling in the chat, and a question from the chat. Nick does not qualify you as an appearance on the roundtable, so you cannot have it based on that alone. And I know what you're trying to do, Nick. But he has a great question. He says, when starting your meetup groups for podcasting, did you have a hard time finding a local place where you can meet? Super hard. For me personally, I can say that, where do you meet? You need a place. It's nice if you can have some AV. If it's quiet, it's not, sort of a room by yourself, and you can hold like at least 10 people. So for me, the answer was public library. You could literally like rent a room, not rent it, but like, reserve a room.
Reserve it. Yeah.
But actually, I did the first one. I may have been the second one there, and I showed up, and there was like 2 people, and they almost told me not to come back because they're like, this is supposed to be minimum 10 people to like hold this room. I was like, yeah, well, it doesn't not like a lot of people were clamoring for that room, but so yeah, I think it's a definite hurdle. It's very hard not only to find people locally who are interested in podcasting and going to go to a group, but yeah, I think that was a challenge for me. So I don't know about you guys.
I didn't have a challenge. Our first meetup was at a bar. It was
but that limits you to a bar. Is not, you can't come be quiet and sort of sit down and meet each other. I mean, it's harder in a bar, and you're not going to do AV in a bar.
No, and I would kind of, well, I don't know. For me, I would not want to have a meetup at a quiet spot unless we were doing something like we did with you, where we need to have things there and we're actually having a discussion on a certain topic. Our first one that we ever did, I didn't want that at all. I wanted it in a public place. I wanted there to be beer, and I wanted there to be a social vibe to the whole thing. Of course, and we picked a place that wasn't just a loud bar. It had an upstairs with a kind of separate pool area. So it was kind of lower tone, but everybody was, if they were nervous coming in, they were not nervous 10 minutes into it. Meeting people just it's really, to me, a social thing. You want to get to know them, talk about other things besides podcasting, get to know what their show is, how long are they doing, what kind of equipment they use. And to me, the easiest place to do that is in maybe a bar, restaurant setting or something like that, where everybody can just be loose and hang out. Now, for other things, as far as, like I said, having maybe Skyping in somebody like yourself to talk to the group about a certain topic, or if you want to get together and say, hey, we're having a certain meetup regarding, we're going to have a tutorial kind of on how to use a certain product or a certain service, then I would agree that would be the case. And I think for us, mostly, we just want to meet each other. There's a bunch of people in our local group that I haven't even met yet. So that's kind of what, to me, it's a little easier to do it that way, at least for the first one.
And, I mentioned, sorry, Dave, I mentioned meetup.com, but there is a fee. I was surprised by that. They're like, hey, is this going to cost you like $60 every quarter or 6 months or something? So I think I'm still paying for that. But, there's another thing that, as the organizer, you may have to shell out some money. So you might have to find another way to organize that. But, it's all about sort of like YouTube. You go there and it's highly searchable. People can find you easier. Meetup helps you with that. But I'm sure there's many options. Dave, what were you going to say?
Well, yeah, it's like $20 a month. And I usually don't say, everybody in my group knows it's $20 a month, and somebody will always chip in for something because we actually have pizza and the whole 9 yards. For me, it was easy because, I work for a place that teaches software, so I had access to classrooms and AV stuff. But if I didn't, I mean, so many places have Wi-Fi, and if you had enough people with laptops where you could share, so anytime I wanted to demonstrate something, I could just pull up a laptop. And again, if you have a small enough group, you can all kind of crowd around that. Or if everybody's got an iPad, you can pull up a website if you're talking about that. So you can find really any place that has Wi-Fi and probably be able to pull off a lot of the stuff that you're trying to do. Not everything, but with a laptop, you could probably pull off a lot.
And you can do this exact thing right here, a Google Hangout. If you've got people that are spread out, why not have a chat like this? And it doesn't have to be public for everybody to chime in, but this right here is a great way for somebody to ask questions of maybe a more seasoned podcaster, or get to meet each other and see each other's faces. So even this kind of forum, I think, is a great start for a group a local group hangout as well. Well, that's why it's called Hangout, I suppose. And then you have to bring your own beer, though. So.
Yes. And I was reading the chat and I totally forgot what I was going to say. But, yeah, it can be, that's the one thing is I found the challenge was how do I get the word? I'm used to getting the word out on the internet. Like, how do I get the word out about this? How do I find the people who would be interested in this when the internet's not as involved? So that's tricky.
Local library could be a great place, especially if the library has a sign out front where they rotate things. They could say just something like, are you a podcaster or do you want to be one? Come hang out with us such and such time, something like that.
Local shops as well, because there's a lot of people that want to do shows about gaming, comic books, that kind of thing. That's how I located some people. And just if you know one other podcaster, talking to them, just creating it that way. That's how I started. I found somebody else and said, hey, let's start a group, and started adding people. And then people start seeing you when you start promoting it yourself. All your friends see it, they pass it on, and then somebody will eventually come and say, hey, I want to start a podcast. Can I join?
Yeah, and then again, it all matters what you're trying to do, right? Like, Wayne, you just want to shake hands and hang out, which is cool. I think that's totally what it should be, too. And then as
you want to clarify, for the initial meetup.
Right, exactly, for the initial one, right? Because then later you might want to actually have a topic, right? Or it could literally be, hey, we just meet at a bar once a month to have drinks and swap stories. That could be totally fine. But, it's funny because I will attempt to tackle this as quickly as possible because Fred was so nice to write this all out in the chat room.
I told you.
And if you're listening to the audio version, you might not see the chat. You might not go back. Although I do post a link on the show notes, because there's lots people share links that I don't always get. There's good stuff in the chat. So thanks to the chat. But Fred, here we go. Here's the history of what we now call NMX, New Media Expo. 2005, Portable Media Expo in Ontario, California. 2006, Portable Media Expo in Ontario. 2007, Podcast and New Media Expo in Ontario. I didn't know they were in Ontario that many years. That's cool. 2008, New Media Expo in Las Vegas. Tim Berkwin. Then our Rick Calvert acquired the show from Tim Berkwin. Then 2009 through 2012, Blog World and New Media Expo in New York, Los Angeles, and Las Vegas, I guess. It was New York and Los Angeles, and then I went back to Vegas, I think. Anyways, I went to New York one. I don't know if you, Dave, I think you were there. Daniel, you might have been there.
Yeah, I was at the New York one.
Yeah. And 2013, 14 New Media Expo in Vegas. Now, 2015, NAB/NMX. So that's National Association of Broadcasters, which is like the CES for gear geeks, me, and New Media Expo. So, wow, Dave, you have a lot of history there to deal with.
It's a ton. I just remember New York being incredibly expensive.
Yeah. It's so funny because Vegas sometimes can be really expensive too. I don't know about you guys, or you could stay in hopefully not a terrible hotel. We'll see about that. But yeah, New York, it all depends on where you're coming from, right? Because the most expensive part is probably travel.
Yeah, you can get Airbnb too.
Now, yeah, Airbnb is awesome. Yeah, now maybe you can do Airbnb as a place for a meetup. I'm gonna get an Airbnb. I'm gonna get a house for the evening. I don't know if there might be some rules against that.
I think it's a big enough group that somebody's got an office like Dave. Somebody's got an office they can use and go in and be able to, hey, we're gonna sneak in.
Yeah. In the beginning, it's hard because you're usually by yourself. You're trying to organize this thing. You don't know the two people who are coming, so you gotta have a spot. So I don't know. It's tricky.
Not so fun when you're talking to your cat. Hey, thanks for coming.
Yeah, I felt like that. The first one, it was kind of like that. I think we had like one person. So don't be discouraged, right? If you think that, hey, if Ray starts a group, tons of people will turn out. It depends on your area. It depends on how well you can get the word out. Not necessarily true for me.
I'm kind of with you guys on, if there was 50, like David said, that there's 50 people, it's not quite it's harder to be really socially engaging with everybody. So if there's 10 people at your meetup, then it's a little bit easier to shake hands, kiss babies kind of thing.
Exactly. Jared Easley has a great story. He held the first Entrepreneur on Fire meetup around New Media Expo, and he said that there were like 5 people there. And he was excited because he got to buy John Lee Dumas some sort of the elephant or whatever the In-N-Out burger thing was. So, 3 years later, the guy's got a a cult following him around at this point.
But see,
That's awesome.
That's a good point, though. I mean, then people come and they think, just like you guys have made yourselves personalities, and people are excited to meet you as if you're a podcast celebrity. And I think if you're doing a show and you don't, and you want to get more exposed, that was one of the reasons about engaging the media and engaging whether it's your local media or whatnot. That's another way of being able to engage an audience by simply being that kind of saying, hey, I've got a show, this is what I do, I've done it for this long, and it kind of gives you credibility there as well. So he wants to start a podcast, they meet you, and they kind of look at you like the experts. So it's a good way to be able to share that expertise.
I want to jump out of the meetup thing, but really quick, Roman Castro in the chat, he says, what format do podcaster meetups or meetings use? Is it like a hot seat where everyone helps and takes turns being in the hot seat? It's whatever you want it to be, really. I think it's best to just sort of get people together and then decide as a group, right? But we won't dive into different formats, but really it's just meet up, literally, like you were saying, like Wayne was saying, like we at a bar, shake hands, good to see you. What do you do? The conversation might have nothing to do with podcast. It will, because you have that in common. But yeah, make your own rules. That's the beauty. But as we start to head out the virtual door, do we have any more podcast crossover sort of stories? Or go ahead,
We've
Dave.
mentioned conferences, and most of us, I think maybe almost all of us, have at some point presented at the new media style conferences. I think one cool way of crossing over is presenting at a conference outside of the typical, group of podcasters or new media people. Like New Media Expo, it's awesome to be a presenter there, but how about presenting at something outside of that? And just in the last year or two, I've started to get to speak at other events. Like I spoke at a writers conference last year, presented on podcasting and social media at a writers conference, and then maybe later this year, I might be presenting at a creative conference in Northern California. And the branching out like that is really cool. Now, each of these places, I am there to primarily talk about podcasting, but for someone in a different niche, it could be something related more to that niche, or that you go and you are to present from that niche and you're outside of other podcasters. And so a lot of people are going to be there thinking, what's a podcast? And you're there to tell them that and tell them about the kind of content that you podcast about.
Yeah, International Podcast Day. It says what it sounds. Getting the word out, right? I mean, it's a great tip, is going, some of the best, when I go to a conference, it's nice to go into sessions where it might be totally unrelated to me, because it's great to hear ideas of people are doing different spaces and bring that back to whatever I'm doing. So I think that's a great tip. I don't know have you guys, I spoke at a video conference once, and it was primarily about podcasting, but it was exposure to a different group. I mean, these were professional broadcasters who, especially back in, 2009 or something, were not as exposed to podcasting and what that is. So yeah, I think that's a great tip. Corey?
Yeah, I'm in education, and I've spoken at a few education conferences, mainly talking about, I'm able to podcast for my employer. And so it's kind of, I do sessions on podcasting, but then also how we use, social media and stuff like that to connect with our students. And I think, like Daniel said, it's good practice. And I think it's good it's easy for us to talk with other podcasters and use certain terminology and stuff. And then it's a completely different thing to present to a room full of people that have no idea what you're talking about. And it kind of helps you communicate that a little bit better to I guess, kind of an entry-level type person.
Even like schools and younger students, high school students that are primed for doing their own show, and maybe they don't know anything about it as well. They just know Twitter and Instagram, apparently. And Netflix, like my kids. Hey, I was going to ask you guys, too, what about, when you're talking outside of what about merchandise? And I know that this is more of a marketing thing, but if you go somewhere, whether it's an event or you just want to go out and you've got shirts, buttons, fun stuff to just hand out, and maybe it isn't all branded with your website name, but it's branded with your logo, and then people will ask about it. So you give them a button or a T-shirt, and then they ask about your show, and then you can engage them that way as well. What do you guys do with that? I mean, I think, Corey, you've got, with yours, that would be kind of a big thing, I would imagine.
Yeah, we just in the last 6 months we started selling T-shirts, and it's gone really well. And then we also have some stuff like branded stuff that we do through Patreon. So, like for example, we have an IVNB pint glass, but we don't sell that. The only way that you can get it is by contributing at a certain level in Patreon. But yeah, we have like this poster right back here. We send to listeners stickers and stuff like that.
Because you can do that too. That's one way when they were talking about how do you get into media, especially local media or even other media. You can mail stuff to them and say, hey, or you can send it. You can send either a press release and a package that has your show and has the information on your show and why they should feature you and why they should have you as a presenter. Would be a good thing. Everybody likes to have swag.
Well, that and the last book I read was all about word of mouth, and they had great examples of, if you think about it, when the iPod came out, everything looked the same except for one that had white earbuds. And that got people, everybody went, oh, I know, you got the expensive one, and that became a class symbol. And Lance Armstrong, had a couple things he was going to put swag, decided to do the little band thing that had everybody talking about it, and then it was cool, and look at me, I'm against cancer, and all these little things that you can kind of wear or it's visual. The fact that an Apple logo, when you open up the thing, is upright. Now, when you close it, it's upside down to you, but it's upright to the person who is looking at it. Just little things like that can spark conversation, and that was kind of the whole point of the book, is people are talking about you anyway. Give them something to talk about, something to spark that conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, if you run into me at Podcasters, or if you run into me anywhere, I might have a Podcasters Roundtable sticker.
I have mine.
I might slap it right on your forehead is what I'll do, so look out, duck. But
well, an example of what happens at a meetup, this is what happens. Corey, who are you using for your T-shirts?
Right, exactly.
Oh, yeah.
So
are you really asking me?
I'm actually asking, who are you?
I found a local T-shirt shop that is way cheaper than any of the places you could order it online. Like way cheaper, much better quality.
As I say, it looked pretty good. I saw like Instagram or something. The quality looked good. I think it was on your wife and your daughter or something was wearing them, and I was like, those. I think that's important too. Like, it should be something you want to wear. If you're going to go that route, for me personally, I like things that are well made, and I'm more likely to. I mean, I'm wearing a GT shirt right now. It was free. They gave it to me, but it's a nice shirt. Like, it's a nice T-shirt, simple branding. I don't even use the site. Like, I think I have an account and I never post there, but I like the shirt. So I'm like free advertising all the time. So yeah, they looked nice. And I know we have a local T-shirt shop. I've thought about looking into that. So that's probably a good idea.
I've made my own screen printing press off of YouTube, and I used to screen print anyway, so it's not a big deal. But you can do simple things if you don't have a lot of money to do that. As far as that goes, is you can do one color screen printing, and you can learn how right on YouTube. But it's also, again, it's a great way to get the attention of maybe somebody that has an event, and they ask you what it is, and then they ask you to present there, or they ask you to talk about your show or your career in podcasting. That's just another way to be able to do that.
Definitely. Any more crossover? I mean, let's think. Well, what else could be considered podcast crossover, Dave?
Well, I was going to echo what Daniel said. I've also gotten asked to speak at a couple writing conferences and a music conference, all about podcasting and growing your audience and things of that nature.
So, Daniel, Dave, you guys have a name. I mean, and you've been doing it a long time. Like, what else can you think of where you were doing something that was related to your show, but it wasn't necessarily your show out of the studio, right?
Well, I produce. I edit audio. Some people I edit their audio because they just said, "Do you do this?" And at the time I wasn't, and I'm like, they're like, "I'll pay you," and I'm like, "Okay, I guess I will." How much are you going? And okay, sure, I'll edit audio for that much money. So it's not doing my show; it's doing other people's show. But that kind of came about because of my podcast and some of the things that I've done over the years. The podcast review show came about because people kept asking me to review their show. And I was like, okay, but it takes a lot of time, so I started charging for it.
Yeah. They're doing the presentations at our local Entertainment and Arts Awards was because of my show. And they, in fact, always have me back because they commented that, wow, you've got a great voice, you've got a great presence up there. You don't hem and haw. You're not wasted. You're up there and you're professional. And I think that is something that I can proudly say of a lot of podcasters, that you're professional, and that shows through when you do these kinds of events. They want me back just because I handled myself well, was good on the mic, and people knew who I was.
So, go ahead, Dave.
That's the key. When you get an opportunity, don't mail it in. Be prepared, ready to go. And when you go in there and you nail it, you're professional, and people are like, wow, that was cool, you're going to get asked back. And then you never know who's in that audience that might go, we got to get that guy for the thing we're doing. So take advantage of every opportunity.
Yeah.
Well said.
And you could also have possibilities literally land on your doorstep when you have a platform and you are an authority out there, or you're just doing a really good job of reviewing something. Many times these companies will start to send you stuff just because they see, oh, he did a great job reviewing this. We'd love him to do a great job reviewing other stuff too. And I did a blog series just because I felt like it, of reviewing managed WordPress hosting companies, because I was bouncing around looking for different ones. And that blog series has given me opportunities to host for free on a year at many different places. They've said, here, we'll give you a hosting account if you'd like to write a review for us. We don't care if you're even negative in the review. We just want an honest review. We'd be happy to provide you with an account, that kind of thing. And also, like, having a platform, being able to go to a company. This just happened today that I was working with a company. I wanted to be a customer, and I just said, oh, by the way, I mentioned you a couple months ago in this podcast episode. And they came back saying, oh, that's awesome. Hey, in fact, we'll give you a free trial for 6 months instead of 2 weeks. So you can have these crossover opportunities into more opportunities to review things or create cool content and build relationships with the companies.
That's also because you know how to do the recording, you know how to use the microphone. I did a thing for the Small Business Association. They didn't know how to podcast, but they wanted to podcast. They wanted to record their big meetings that they have. So I was able to go out there and you can record them, and it's doing the same thing, but like Dave said, for somebody else. And it wasn't podcast related, but you are creating a podcast for somebody else and helping them out because of your show.
Yeah, Dave, we are going to be stepping out of the studio, maybe in MX. All right, you can go to these conferences. MX has a live podcast area, right? So if you have a show and you're going there, it's probably too late to get into it now.
Actually,
maybe not.
It's not.
It's wide open. All right.
Yeah. How do I explain this one? Just go to schoolofpodcasting.com/podcastalley. I'll put it this way. When Cliff handed me the baton, he said, here's the fun part, Dave. Things will change, and then you'll set up a schedule, and things will change. So, yeah, we thought basically we got a lot of room for more people. If you want to podcast live at New Media Expo, lots of room. schoolofpodcasting.com/podcastalley. Sign up today. And, I'm not sure, and that's why there's no schedule posted yet, is because all of a sudden we went, oh, the schedule changed again. So as soon as it gets solidified, but I'm waiting for some responses from Rick. And so I'm not going to say here's when we'll announce it because I need to hear from Rick, and Rick is a very busy man. So, but if you're interested, definitely go over and check it out. There's a very good chance you'll be podcasting live, and there's going to be an audience there. They're going to have a sound system there. We did it a little while back. Sounds like they're going to make it a little more pro, and from what I've heard. And if you're interested, definitely do. That's what I'm doing when I get done here. Is I'm going to go approach some people that we think would be good fits. But hey, if you want to take their spot, by all means, sign up.
Very cool. All right. Well, we will wrap it up and get out of here. But I think that, look for opportunities that your podcast may have either trained you for or introduced you to. Always keep an ear open, but get out there and do stuff with either your community or start a new community in your local community. Lots of community stuff going on. But just look for different ways to get out there and meet people, and you can use podcast as sort of that initial introduction or that core common theme that you guys have. But a lot of cool things can come from it for sure. So as we go out, just tell us where we can find your podcast, and thank you for being on another round. Make sure you check in podcastersroundtable.com. sign up there so that you can be notified when these go live. We try to do every 2 weeks, and that should fall right in line with about NMX as well. So 49 from NMX, it would be been cool if it was 50. I think technically it might be 50 because we didn't count the one where we rebroadcasted our talk from NMX, but technicalities, no big deal. So anyways, Corey, thanks for joining us again for another roundtable.
Yeah, thanks a lot for letting me participate. ivmv.com, and then I'm also a co-host at podcastersgrouptherapy.com.
Yeah, new show about podcasting. Check out that one, and I believe we had Nick on, and he got to plug that one as well too. So hopefully it's going well. It's a good show. Daniel, thanks again for joining us yet again.
You're very welcome. I'm hoping to cross over, and you can cross over with me. Are you ready to cross over? That could be my new slogan for the opening. Check me out over at theaudacitytopodcast.com and on Twitter at @theramennoodle.
Yeah, Wayne's probably got he can voice that for you.
Yeah.
It's
Crossing over.
Do not walk towards Wayne's voice.
Head to the light.
Dave, thanks again, buddy. I know you got a lot on your plate. The NMX coming up, so thanks for taking time to help us co-host this thing.
Yeah, always fun to be here. Glad to be back after missing a few. And you can find me at schoolofpodcasting.com. You can find all my podcasts at the brand new powerofpodcasting.com.
Oh, wow. Finally, you probably own that domain for 10 years.
I do own that domain, yeah. And it's not officially done, but done enough to peek and poke around at this point.
Nice. Yeah, cool. Go check that out. All right, Wayne, hopefully you enjoyed your first roundtable. Thanks so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you guys. It has truly been an honor. I've been following, well, at least 3 of you guys for a while. So you can find Worlds of Wayne at worldsofwayne.com.
And that's the beauty. You meet new people. I mean, lots of times Dave just poaches people from the roundtable to have on his show. So he's just like, hey, I met this new person. They got this great story. Come on to the School of Podcasting. So now, if you're not already a Cubs fan, I would encourage you becoming one. But hey, this year might be the year. Now's the time. There's no better time than the beginning of a baseball season for a Cubs fan, is there, Corey?
That's right.
Then 2 weeks in, try again next year. Give it a hard time. All right, you guys. Thanks. The chat, you rocked it again. Addie, Steve, Fred, Dave Lee checking in late. I see him. InternationalPodcastDay.com. Check that out. Craig Whelan is going to be at NMX. Lots of great people in the chat. Mike, of course, we had all these Omaha podcasters. Jim and Roman. Rob Greenlee joined us. So thanks again to the chat. Everyone should go and check out all the cool stuff they were saying during the round and some cool links there. But we will see you next time for round 49. And until next time, wave goodbye, everybody.